Okay, I believe I'm all set here. You ready for me to go?
It's all yours. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. All right, I'd like to welcome you all to my presentation. I hope this gives you a glimpse into how the United States Department of Agriculture Smuggling, Interdiction, and Trade Compliance Division helps support U.S. agriculture and also promotes the commerce for those unassociated with the direct production of agricultural commodities. Smuggling, Interdiction, and Trade Compliance, I'm just going to use the acronym SITC. Okay, so I'm going to refer to it as SITC because as you can see from this title page, the acronyms can be a little tedious. To introduce myself, my name is Ryan Thomas. I've just been with the agency 7 years. 5 of that was with SITC. I actually got my start in Houston, Texas, which is a bit of a bigger port than where I am now, which is in Penfield, New York, just outside of Rochester. There's not a lot of commerce. There's not a lot of trade going through Port of Rochester, but being in Houston was a good start for me. It gave me a good perspective on what it's like to work in a bigger port. And then I also have the perspective here of being in a smaller area. So I've done both sides of it. Either way you cut it though, people in our agency refer to us as, I guess, ag police. We're the envy of the agency. Everyone that I've talked to kind of thinks our job is interesting and like, oh yeah, I want to do that. I want to do that. So I'm very lucky to be in this position, and hopefully I can give you a glimpse and you'll agree. It does blend conservation, natural resource conservation with international studies and agriculture. So it's right up my alley. It's very interesting. So just a quick overview of the topics I hope to cover today. I think to fully comprehend what SITC is, you kind of need a general history and just see the evolution of the program. It's a relatively new program, but you'll see the evolution and why it came to be. Then I'd like to introduce our methodologies, kind of how we do our job, what we do. I'm going to tell you a lot of people don't even know we exist, and we kind of like it that way. But I'll give you a glimpse into it. There's obviously a big in the field component. And then there's also an internet component. The internet has grown vastly, and we have struggled to deal with that at times, but we have a methodology to deal with internet sales and importations. And then of course, as with almost any government agency, there's a playing well with others aspect, and that playing well with others means we have to communicate effectively with other government agencies for port security to really work in a fluid machine like motion. So, and this is an important one. It's kind of what products are we looking for? We can't go through everything that comes to the port or everything that makes it to market. So there are certain products that we look for, and I'll go over that and kind of why we look at those products as opposed to something else. And then I will look at just a few of the pests that kind of inspire our work. So we'll look at the products, why we look at them, but then we'll delve more into, well, what kind of pests are there that could be accompanied by, these products. So we'll look at a few pests, just a couple. I mean, there are dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of them, but we'll just look at a few that the USDA really has on their hot list. And in the final segment, we'll kind of look at New York State a little more closely and just get an idea of what the dynamics in New York are. It may not come as a surprise to you. New York City and upstate New York are vastly different when it comes to this area. And hopefully I have plenty of time for comments, questions, all that at the end. So let's go into the history quick. It all started in the mid-1990s. So in the United States, we actually have an exotic fruit growers in like South Florida. It's pretty much the only climate where you can grow exotic Asian fruits, and particularly Homestead, Florida. But in the mid-1990s, these growers were getting adversely affected by kind of a saturation of the market, and they knew that it wasn't coming from Florida because it can't come from anywhere else in the US. So they knew it was coming from external sources. So they went to the USDA about it. And USDA, along with enforcement services, investigative enforcement services, IES, they launched an investigation. They wanted to find out where these exotic fruits were coming from, because obviously they weren't coming from South Florida. And when I say exotic fruits, they're not the typical fruits that you see at your everyday local grocery store. I mean, yeah, Wegmans might carry a few here and there, but overall it's not that. I mean, we're talking, like here, rambutan, lychee. We have some others, but that's what I mean by exotic Asian fruits. So IES and USDA launched an investigation, and they kind of concluded, and this part in the map here, it's just a rough sketch of the avenue these fruits took, but they actually originated in Thailand, and they came over by vessel, came over by air, all the way across the Pacific and in through Canada. And the reason they're able to go through Canada is because Canada doesn't have a Florida of their own. They don't have an exotic fruit industry because, well, there's not a climate up there that can support such fruits. So Canada doesn't have the port restriction that we do in the United States for these fruits. So they get into Canada a little more easily. And once in Canada, they have obviously thousands of miles of border which they can cross. And they actually took the avenue of through the Port of Buffalo, through the Port of Champlain, kind of picked on New York a little bit, and they got it down to New York City, which New York City, as you probably know, is a hub for trade. So they got it down to New York, and I mean, it spread throughout the country from there fairly quickly. So PPQ, which is USDA and IES, kind of decided to clamp down on this. And they started doing a little more thorough inspection at the Port of Buffalo, at the Port of Champlain. And in just 2 years, they seized 68 tons of smuggled Asian fruits. So obviously there was quite a bit coming through, because even though they clamped down, some was still getting through. But obviously, it was successful. 68 tons is no small amount. They also prosecuted, because IES has the ability to prosecute violators. So not only are you seizing this product that came from Thailand through Canada into the Port of Buffalo, that costs a lot of money to ship. So when you seize that at the border and destroy it, that costs money. But then IES also prosecuted the violators. So they issued them citations for, a few thousand more dollars, and they were hurting a little more. So those pathways kind of slowed down, and USDA saw that as a success. But there were a couple of other pathways that were still alive and well. So PPQ established 2 additional ones called CLAMP and FIST. CLAMP was it was an agency and state cooperative in Los Angeles, because Los Angeles was seeing influx of exotic fruits and prohibited agricultural items. And same in Florida. Obviously, that's where the industry is. That's where you want to protect it. So they established FIST in Florida, which is Florida Interdiction and Smuggling Team, which is kind of where our name came from. But both FIST and CLAMP were also very successful. They sealed pathways for exotic pests, and they secured the domestic markets in which they were supposed to protect. Obviously, Florida and California are agricultural giants. So when you get an invasive pest in there, that can have ripple effects throughout the country. It was found smuggling was shockingly common. I guess we never knew about before. I mean, port security before 9/11 was maybe a little more lax. And you kind of focus on, drug trade, human smuggling. But a lot of the players that, take part in that also take part in agricultural smuggling. It can be very profitable, and it still is today. So PPQ and USDA, they kind of realized that this was a critical issue. There were tons of fruits and other agricultural items coming into the border. So they decided that something else was needed. They needed a permanent division to kind of deal with this smuggling. And so they created SITSI, Smuggling, Interdiction, and Trade Compliance. And it's kind of what we have today. So it's been around probably around 20 years. So it's still a relatively new division of the USDA. But right now we have anywhere from 100 to 175 staff nationwide. So it's not a huge division. It's an important one though, but it's one that a lot of people don't know exists. And I'm just going to kind of give you the breakdown of how it all operates. At the top, of course, we have our national management. They're the ones, we don't really hear from them on a day-to-day basis. They're the ones that are updating our policies. They're the ones that are talking to veterinary services, getting the latest updates on animal diseases overseas so that we know how to regulate certain commodities from certain countries. So like, for example, on a regular basis now, I kind of see updates on African swine fever because that's, it's run through the globe. And it seems like every couple of weeks we get a new email about a country that is now ASF positive. And so that's what a national manager does. Below them, they have regional supervisors, which they're the typical supervisors in the large ports, and they kind of deal with the officers day to day, what they need, and deal with day-to-day questions and kind of make sure the port is operating smoothly. And then on the other side, we have analysts. We have SITC analysts and we have hub analysts. And these are our internet, our virtual policemen, so to speak. So SITC analysts have an interesting position. They kind of help the officers in the field get their information. They receive information from the officer about a particular business, perhaps, that they suspect of having smuggling goods. And the analyst is able to look up information using law enforcement databases. They can look up aliases, residences, phone numbers, known associates, that kind of thing. So the analysts kind of have a more top secret level of clearance in the government because they're able to access these databases. And kind of on par with that, we have hub analysts, and they're located in Raleigh, North Carolina. There are, I think, about 4 of them right now. And they're the ones that tackle our internet smugglers. And I'll get to that a little bit later. And so the real meat and potatoes of the operation are under the regional supervisors, and that's the SITC and it's called FICDOs, which are plant health trade compliance officers. So these really are only part-time SITC officers. They also have other duties, more domestic duties. So let's say there's 100 officers in the country. Probably half of them are only part-time. So that really puts us at like 75 officers kind of doing SITC work at any given time. And in case you're wondering, so this is our authority. People kind of ask us, oh, well, if you're, who gives you the right to kind of do your job? And it's a recent, like I said, it's recent. The Plant Protection Act of 2000 and the Animal Health Protection Act of 2002. That's what gives USDA employees the authority to stop and inspect without warrant. So we don't need to, present a warrant to anyone to inspect anything really. So we can work at the border and we can kind of look through the cars or trucks or whatever we deem necessary to look at. We kind of need cause, can't just look at anything willy-nilly, but we do have the authority to look at anything. And then interstate and even, intrastate, we can look at shipments as well if it's deemed an emergency. And as far as what constitutes an emergency, well, that varies. Usually it's if there's already a quarantine established for a particular item. For example, in Western New York, we have a European cherry fruit fly quarantine for, cherry commodities. So if we saw a produce truck that we suspected of carrying cherries from inside the quarantine, kind of leave the quarantine, we could, if we wanted to, follow that and, inspect it whenever it stops and make sure that it's not bringing, potentially infested material outside the quarantine. But the authority from this CFR is on the back of our ID cards. So we're able to present that to people if they really want to give us trouble about it. And of course, we have our badges that make us look like law enforcement, but we're not really law enforcement. I'll get to that in a second. So our methodology. I know it extends beyond the port a little bit. So what we do is absolutely crucial to our port security, but we are kind of the last line of defense, and we're kind of a continuation of the port into the marketplace. So especially for non-port of entry places, such as Rochester, where I am located myself, most of our work it's done in the markets. So people call us professional shoppers, and to some extent, they're actually correct. We kind of just look like your everyday grocery shoppers or decor shoppers or whatever it may be, but we're shopping for foreign origin products only. If it's obviously domestic, we don't care because we're not worried about the disease risk within our own country. We're worried about foreign diseases and foreign pests getting into the country. And mainly we're looking at animal products, which a lot of meat and a lot of dairy. And then we're also looking at produce, grains, propagative materials, seeds and live plants. And there are even like religious items. Mainly it's like Hindu material. They bring in a lot of seeds, cow excrement and things for religious purposes. But, we also come across around Easter, a lot of crosses are brought in from Israel with soil in them, actually. So we do have to regulate religious items, though we have to do that a little more carefully than with some of the other items. So when we're in these markets, we find a product that we're interested in. Then we ask the owner or an associate or purchasing manager, whoever it may be, for documentation of their purchase. We want to make sure that they actually purchased it lawfully. In New York State, you're required to have invoices for anything that you're selling. So we ask for documentation for an invoice. And for our purposes, that's mainly so we can find out where it came from. When I'm at a market in Rochester, chances are they're not importing containers into the port of Rochester and for their particular market. They're getting it from a bigger port. So I ask for that invoice, and usually it goes back to somewhere, an importer in New York City or Newark or Chicago or LA or wherever it is. So then I take that product, take photos, put it on hold, whatever I have to do, take the invoice, and I send that to the port of entry. Let's just say New York City for this example. And so that's called a traceback. And then the officer in New York City visits with the importer, and it goes on from there. And the other reason why a lot of people don't know that we exist, we kind of do our work undercover, I guess you could say. We're not trying to be sneaky, but we definitely don't want to announce our presence. I experienced this in Houston, not so much here, but when you show up in a government vehicle with government plates and you get out of the car with a USDA logo on your shirt, people know that you're not there to shop, and a lot of times they know that they have products that they're not supposed to, and they'll run, or they'll take all the products and dump it in the dumpster in the back, or they'll do something. They'll lock a door or lock several doors, and so they definitely know that you're coming when you come in there, and with a full uniform on. So we tend not to shop with our uniforms. So continuing the methodology, what are the products that we look for? Well, we look at everything. So we can shop at any store. We can shop at mostly international groceries, sure. But that doesn't mean that we don't, hit Wegmans and Walmart and all those other places that carry groceries as well. And we're looking at the meats, we're looking at the grains, we're looking at the produce that have potentially foreign origin. But our span goes beyond groceries as well. So this is just for an example, millet is one highly regulated item that we look for in a lot of markets. And this particular millet came from India. We also look at a lot of home goods stores, especially this time of year as the holidays ramp up. You got a lot of fall items, Thanksgiving and Christmas, a lot of decor comes in. So we have a lot of handicrafts that we look for. Anything that can be made of foreign origin plant material. So that's wood, that's straw, that's, rice straw, that's sorghum, all this other stuff that, you can see this scarecrow here actually had sorghum seed heads on it from India. So that's a no-no because it's such a closely related corn relative. So we regulate that for disease. We also go into pet stores. As you know, most pets are carnivorous, so they're eating a lot of animal product. A lot of pet food does have animal origins. You'd be surprised at how compliant pet food companies are, though, with their permits. So we don't come across a lot of pet food. More often than not, we're actually coming across toys, usually associated with like birds or rodents or even dog toys. And they're made of organic material as well. Like this is actually something I found a couple of years ago at a local pet store. And it's made with rice straw that still had seed heads on it. And we do have a rice industry in the southern United States, so we do regulate for that. And this particular rice straw came from Malaysia. And again, it's something you need a permit for. It's something you potentially need to treat at the port, and they have none of that. So potentially this could bring in disease. And finally, one of the biggest risks we face are the express courier companies. Nothing against them at all. They do great business, but like the DHL, FedEx, UPS, it's more of an issue of volume than anything else, because they're getting thousands and thousands of small packages every day, and they're coming at a fast pace. So somebody in Thailand can go into the backyard, pick a bunch of leaves and fruits off the tree, put it in a box, send it away, and later that week, it's going to arrive at our port. And I mean, this comes in constantly, and Customs only has so much that they can do. They have so many packages that they can inspect. These things come flying down a belt if you've ever been in one of these facilities, and it's pretty hard to find everything that might be a risk. So this is definitely a potential for a disease vector, potential for pest risk, all that stuff. And just as an example, this is something that I found going through express courier shipment from Nepal. That's just a bunch of dried buffalo meat from Nepal. And obviously Nepal no meat from Nepal is really allowed into the US. There's no approved manufacturing facility over there for it. And this is probably just dried, home style. And, foot and mouth disease is alive and well there. So as I was talking about before, we send a lot of our work to New York City because that's where the imports take place. So the work that goes on in larger ports, New York City, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, Houston, and the list goes on, Miami, their work is not so much done in the marketplaces. Their work is predominantly done in warehouses and distribution facilities. So they're working with the importers, and they're working even closer with customs. A lot of their inspections are done with customs officials actually at the port of entry. When containers come in off the sea vessel, SITSI and customs are right there because they knew it was coming, kind of thing. So they're looking at entry documents more than anything. They're looking for permits. They're looking for fumigation records. They're looking for a phytosanitary certificate if it's a plant material. They're looking for veterinary certificates if it's anything to do with animal product. And so this is an example of a phytosanitary certificate here. But I was actually just talking to a colleague 2 days ago, and they had a huge shipment from China that was actually sealed up and sent back to sea because it had a fraudulent veterinary certificate from China on it. They found like a misspelling on it, something that cued them off, and they found out that it was fraudulent. The whole shipment got sealed up and sent back to sea. So document examination is very important here, and that's something that they do at the major ports. And this is also where they find huge shipments of non-compliant material. So let's quickly go to the internet, because obviously with the pandemic as well, internet shopping has become gargantuan. I mean, it's very difficult because it's a huge growing source for food, decor, plant sales, etc. But this is the space that we don't survey. This is the space where the analysts survey. They're the best available option, but we still face a tremendous amount of obstacles. So like I said, internet sales are increasing. And we can't waltz into the virtual world and survey everything and look at everything as if we went into a marketplace and we're able to do that. And accountability is still a little bit of a gray area. You can, like, buyers and sellers are still mainly, they're anonymous. You know, they have screen names, but that doesn't necessarily tell you who they are, where they live, or any of that stuff. And obviously, one of the biggest things is there can be 100 tiny transactions to 100 different spots in the country in the matter of 5 minutes. So if they're buying something directly from, let's just say, Vietnam, they can just go on the internet and 100 different people in 100 cities in the US can buy the same product from Vietnam and have it shipped to 100 different, small ports. And chances are some of that is getting in. So how do we combat that? Well, with the analyst, we have a couple things in our favor. One of those, we have disclosure agreements between the USDA and some of the major vendors, some of the major online retailers. Just to name a couple: Amazon, eBay, Etsy. They all have agreements with the USDA. So if we're able to find a product that's for purchase online that we think is prohibitive, then Amazon, eBay, Etsy, they work with us and they're actually able to give us a list of people that have purchased that product. And through some means beyond me, they're able to find, person's name and their contact information. Sometimes that leads to a dead end, but it's usually pretty good. Like I said, they do that through law enforcement databases. We don't have access to that as officers. You need to be an analyst, and there are only a handful of analysts in the country that have access to this. So what they do is very, it's under file. They don't share that with everyone. Only the officers that actually need to go and visit the location, find out any information about that particular individual. So they have those law enforcement databases. They use them. They find out who purchased what products, and then they send those traces out to the officers that we have throughout the country. And those officers kind of do their dirty work. So the analysts never have to go out and do a seizure. They never have to really go out and talk about import requirements and do outreach. They just get the information out there to the officers. The officers go to residences, to markets, to wherever these products came in through the internet, and they're the ones visiting. And this is probably the riskiest part of our jobs, because we're going to people's houses, for example. And like this photo here, people buy bonsais, for example, for hundreds of dollars, sometimes a couple $1,000s for a bonsai. And we go there with the intent of having to seize that article and destroy it. So people aren't very happy to see us most of the time. That's why they like us to work in pairs. I mean, that doesn't apply to me because I'm the only one that works in my location, but that is where we do encounter some dangerous activity. And the internet does have everything. And this is just one example. You can do a search on Amazon or eBay. You can find just about anything online. And that's the biggest complaint people have. They say, well, if it's online, if Amazon is selling it, why don't you go after them? And that's a complex issue, and it has to do with trade agreements that go way, way above us and way above the agency. But this example here, we have pork slices from China, and you can get that potentially delivered to your home. Obviously, China is not somewhere we want to get our pork from because they have a lot of African swine fever right now, and they have for the past year or so. And we see a lot of pork coming from China, and that's probably our most dangerous pathway. But as you can see, it's very expensive. That's for one package, 150 grams, and they're asking for $30 plus $8 shipping. But people are willing to pay that. And if you go to New York City and you go to one of the many Chinatowns, you'll see some of this product probably. We're doing our best to shut it down, but it continually comes in, and it's expensive. So it's not coming in properly. As I alluded to in the introduction, what we do, it's a collaborative effort. Um, if it was just us on our own, it wouldn't have much to do with port security. Most of what we do, that information is then sent to customs. So we work together, and sometimes customs does invite us to work at the port with them at the border. And we call those, at least in Western New York, locally, we call it a border blitz. And that's at the port of entry. For example, Peace Bridge in Buffalo, we'll go and work with customs agents there. And that's where we're doing, container inspections on trucks. We're doing passenger, vehicle inspections. And we're just looking for any fruits or meats or whatever that might be coming through. We also, when I was in Houston, we did a lot of passenger baggage at the airport. Well, that's endless excitement. You would not believe what people try to bring in with their personal luggage. As to how the plane wasn't rerouted because of the odor, it's beyond me, because some of this stuff is really, really fragrant. But yeah, so passenger baggage is another one that's always interesting. Sometimes you have the detector dogs at that point, beagles, and they help with that. And then we also have maritime and container inspections kind of at the seaport. And again, this is more pertinent to like New York City or Houston or Miami. When sea vessels come in, we're there for the unloading. It's put into cold storage or whatever, and then we devan it right there and look through all the pallets and make sure the manifest kind of matches the material that's actually manifested, or make sure the manifest matches the products that are within the container. We also work with our state partners. We do so in New York, but in some states it's even more, it's I guess a more intimate grouping. Like in Texas and Florida, I know the feds in the states work very closely. They did like interstate roadway inspections. In Texas, we did that numerous times on the border with Louisiana, because I-10 goes from Florida all the way to California, and there are a lot of citrus regulations down there. So we're looking at refrigerated trucks and just kind of making sure that the citrus that they're bringing in is properly permitted, or no citrus at all. We're looking at other agricultural items too, because once an item is smuggled in, it has to get shipped out somehow. So it's very common that you would, find a truck from New York City going down driving all the way down to Houston, and you'd look in there and you'd find some articles that are not supposed to be there. So the roadway inspections are a useful tool, and we really need our state partners to do that. And then, of course, we also work with other federal partners. A lot of times when I'm working, I'll find things that are not under our jurisdiction, like this photo down here, a little rodent creature. Yeah, so rodents tend not to be agricultural related. We don't regulate for any disease or anything like that associated with rodents. However, US Fish and Wildlife, they do, especially if it is a protected or CITES, or just a foreign origin animal of any kind. Then we call US Fish and Wildlife. The same applies for passenger baggage. You find ivory or animal pelts or something along those lines, then yeah, US Fish and Wildlife is there to help us, because chances are if someone has an animal they're not supposed to, they might have an agricultural item they're not supposed to in the future. So it's good to get them tagged as a highly suspicious traveler in the future. And again, with a lot of these containers that we're looking at, it's more than just food. They're also bringing in medicine from their countries of origin. And we can't regulate that, but someone like FDA can. So we unload a shipment of, whatever it might be, let's say rice and pumpkin seeds from Nigeria, but it also has a lot of, maybe soap and medicine accompanied with it. We can't hold it because there's nothing agricultural that we find non-compliant, but we know that those drugs are not supposed to come in. So we call FDA to kind of hold it up and get them into the system. And if an article is determined to be non-compliant, if it is prohibited, we as city officers can place it on hold, or we can seize it, take it into our possession. Then the importer kind of has to make a couple choices. They can recall the product from throughout the country, like all the places in the country where it ended up. They can recall it back to the point of origin, to destroy it, or they can treat it if it just needs treatment. Let's say it's mangoes or something along those lines. They can bring them all back and give them methyl bromide treatment, but chances are that's not going to happen with something that high risk. And they also have the option to re-export if they find it at the port of entry. I don't particularly love that one because chances are you re-export, chances are they're going to go to another port and try there. It's called port shopping, something that's been around for decades, and it's something that they still do today. So try not to re-export, but if the importer wants to do that, we have to allow them to do that. The most common result is destruction, whether it's carried out by the importer or individual USDA offices. Most of the product is destroyed that we find. The overarching goal, though, is to close our pathway. And here in Rochester, for example, it's done usually through education. A lot of the store owners here, they don't know the rules and regulations. Maybe they've only been in the country 10 years, 5 years, and they don't really know. So it just takes education, and then you find that they're pretty in line and compliant for years to come. But if not, then you first start, they lose their permit if one exists. That means they can't import that product anymore, or they'll lose money in some way. If they continue to import without a permit, then we start slapping them with some real financial burdens. So they lose the product, yes, that costs probably the most money, but then cases are also given to IES, which is the Investigative Enforcement Services, and they make recommendations to the Department of Justice for a penalty. The penalties can go up to, I think it's in the range of $300,000. I have yet to see a penalty that high, but I've seen a couple that are in the tens of thousands, which might be a pocket change for some of these companies, but at least it's sending a message, and hopefully it works. So what do we look for? This is all in a book. So we're not going out there and just kind of, oh, what do I feel like, seizing today? Or what do I feel like looking at today? No, there are certain products that we look for from certain countries, and it's all written down in the Code of Federal Regulations. And these guide every action that we take. So we are regulatory officers, not law enforcement officers. And regulatory officers, it's very similar, but the CFRs are a little different. They're kind of enacted they're more executive, and they're instituted by agencies as opposed to actions by Congress. But they're still law-like, and you're still breaking rules that are subject to fines and penalties if you break a CFR. It's just CFRs come about in a different way. They're more expedited, and they're just not actions of Congress. They're actions of particular agencies. And I think there are 50 subsets of CFRs. The US Department of Agriculture has numbers 7 and 9 of the 50. And we use these manuals to guide our decision-making and to guide, I guess, what products we go after. Their animal products manual is maybe one of the most common that we use because we come across a lot of prohibited meat and dairy. We also use plants for planting and the miscellaneous and processed products manual. Miscellaneous processed products, that's what we use for like all the decor and any agricultural item that has been processed. So like pumpkin seeds that have been roasted, for example, are no longer just pumpkin seeds. They've been roasted, they've been processed in some way. And this is what a CFR, this is what a manual looks like. We have a series of tables, hundreds of pages of tables, and we're looking at ruminant meat and meat byproducts right now. Excuse me. And obviously we follow it from left to right. So we'll look at an example in just 1 second here so we can follow along. This is an example I had a couple of years ago. Local market in New York, came across this drink from Thailand, and 5 different kinds. They all kind of had the similar ingredients, all same country of origin. So as SETC officers, when we find a product, we always look at the origin and the ingredients. Those are the important things. Here we have a product that's fresh milk along with sugar, and that's crucial. So this is milk and sugar from Thailand. All right. So what do? We go to our animal products manual, and we spend a little bit of time. We find the right table, we get to it. And as you can see, this is a sweetened milk with sugar listed as an ingredient. Qualifies that. Could also be a sweetened milk mixture, et cetera, et cetera. Is it from Canada? No, it's from Thailand, so it's other than Canada. And I'll tell you right now, Thailand is considered affected with foot and mouth disease. Most countries are, but we have a separate manual for disease status of different countries. So Thailand is affected with FMD. And this is where permitting becomes a concern, because there are plenty of products out in the marketplaces. And this might be concerning to some, but there are plenty of products in the market that come from FMD positive countries that have milk that's sweetened, but they have permits for it. So USDA just needs to know about it. They need to regulate it. And I think part of that is, so if something happens, a foot and mouth disease outbreak occurs in that country, they know exactly what company's been importing, where it went, et cetera, et cetera. They can take, reactive action. But this company did not have a permit, so you have to follow that. And it's just a basic refuse entry. You don't even have to click on another, hyperlink to get anywhere else in the table. So we know that this product was prohibited, and it was a case of, well, this got by customs, which is understandable. That's going to happen, but it was never supposed to get beyond the port of entry. So it kind of fell into our jurisdiction. We've had to follow it all the way to the markets. We got it. We collected it. We destroyed it. The risk has been then mitigated. So why do we do what we do? I think I've alluded to it. It's all about reducing risk. So there are plenty of diseases and pests that we're looking for, and what I call micro, like the disease risk, the things that you really can't see, the plant disease, the animal disease. And there are a series of both. Okay, and then there are also the macro pests, even though they're not always big. I call these, the insects and the other invasives, like plants. Okay, giant hogweed is a huge concern. A lot of fruit flies, forest pests, that kind of thing. And I call them macro. That's just because people can usually see those maybe once they've become a problem. But they're definitely not big, because they're in fruit as larvae, or they're as a seed, they're stuck to the bottom of your shoe. It's not always easy to see them. But we do this because we have an obligation to protect the US market. Like that milk product before, you might be saying, oh, that looks like a delicious product. Why are you destroying that? And trust me, I do not love destroying products that are, grown, produced, manufactured halfway around the world, shipped thousands of miles, and then shipped again once, makes entry into the port, just to destroy all that. It's a lot of work. It's a big carbon footprint. I don't want to destroy it, but when you look at the risk, destroying that product, it far outweighs the cost of what it would be if that did introduce a pest into our agricultural system. Because as you can see from that photo below, if African swine fever, for example, got into our swine population, just think of the damage that would do, and think of the man hours, and think of the financial costs, and then all the lives of the livestock that would then have to be destroyed. And same applies to fruit. I've been on details where I go down to Texas and Florida with fruit fly, and you're going through groves and you're stripping all the fruit, and it's all getting bagged and thrown away. And there's a lot of work that goes into growing. A lot of nutrients laid down, a lot of labor hours, and then all that fruit is produced, and you just have to throw it away because a pest has gotten in there. So a little on this end saves a lot on the other end. Here I'm just going to very quickly go through some pests that are kind of on the USDA watch list. The biggest grain pest in the world, probably, that we're most concerned about is the capra beetle. It's one of the most destructive. It has origins in South Asia. I'm talking like India, Pakistan, that area, but it's throughout the Middle East and some African countries. And that is why we have regulations on things like rice, chickpeas, cucurbit seeds, and even burlap. These guys can survive in very dry conditions, and they don't need a lot of food to survive either. And they're very, very small. They're just over 1 millimeter big. So they blend in very well with a grain of rice. And then, of course, if you're importing these products, they're going to need certificates, but then a lot of them also need a fumigation upon arrival, just in case there are any insects in there. We fumigate for 48 hours, 72 hours, whatever it may be, to kill anything that's in there. And we have a hot button issue for today, African swine fever. This originated in sub-Saharan Africa, as the name indicates, but it quickly spread through Asia. And you probably heard last month it was found in the Dominican Republic. So it's getting a little closer to home. We don't love that. But honestly, I think that China is still more of a risk as far as pork than the Dominican Republic. We see a lot of pork products from China smuggled into this country, especially New York City. So I still think that is the biggest risk for this. And it's a huge risk because the virus has been found in cured meats for up to 3 months. And I think Vietnam did tests on these little sausages that we find in the United States all the time from China. And they found the live virus in these sausages as well. So chances are the virus has at least a couple times gotten into America, which is a little concerning, but until it finds its way into the swine population, I mean, we should be okay, but I mean, the idea is we keep it out in whole and don't worry about it. In reaction to this, we don't allow pork products from any affected country. Basically, if you had a permit, you probably lost it. Pork from these areas is a big no-no, and we've created a buffer in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, now that it's in the Dominican Republic. And we have city officers there surveying markets constantly, looking for any pork products that could have come from neighboring Dominican Republic. We also have fruit flies, and there are many species here. And we're not talking about the Drosophila that fly around your ripe bananas. These are fruit flies. So they have Mediterranean, Mexican, Oriental. There's a broad spectrum of hosts, and everywhere in the country it's affected by it. As I talked about before, European cherry fruit fly is in New York. So these aren't just California, Texas, Florida fruit flies. They're everywhere. And this is one of the reasons why we have such high restrictions on fresh fruit and vegetables. And we have pre-clearance programs overseas. So like citrus in South Africa, we have Asian pears in South Korea, we have apple programs in Chile and New Zealand, to where we make sure that the product is okay before we even put it on a vessel and ship it over to the United States. And here's another big one because it kind of crosses that boundary of human health as well. So BSE is not very common, but it's also still, I guess, perplexes us a bit. We don't know much about the transmission, but we assume that it's a prion type protein, but it's very difficult to get rid of. So even canning, expose it to high temperatures doesn't kill it. And it also has a very long incubation period. So something might be affected with BSE for years, and we may not see the symptoms right away. And the US has had cases in recent years, and I think there have been, upwards of a dozen cases in the last 10 years or so. The most recent came in 2018, but you don't hear much about it, which is good because they're being tested. If a country is determined to be BSE positive, basically no product is permitted. It doesn't matter if it's canned or jarred or it's been cooked thoroughly or anything like that. No level of processing is adequate. That used to be the case with anything from the European Union. And then we have forest pests. And by this, I kind of mean wood borers. Asian longhorn beetle is kind of our flagship domestic program in the USDA. But there are other wood boring pests out there. There are other forest pests, but this is part of the reason why we do a lot of, home goods store surveys, and we go after wood products. This is actually a product in your bottom right that I found at a store in rural New York. It was actually imported into Ohio, but if first glance it looks fine. It's a fake tree. It's kind of ironic because it's a fake tree that's embedded into a real tree. And so that real piece of wood there wasn't debarked, it wasn't fumigated, it wasn't heat treated. And the really concerning part is tiny little pinholes everywhere are actually exit holes from insects. As to when those insects came out, who knows? Was it in China? Hopefully. But that's a real concern when you get untreated wood from overseas. And the USDA does require these products to be treated at the port of entry, to have a permit, et cetera, which is really important because a lot of pests can live a long time in untreated wood. And just our last section here, just kind of hitting on New York and the status of New York. We have 4 locations where city officers reside. Currently, we have 1 officer in Buffalo, 1 in outside of Rochester, 1 in Albany, and then we have about 4.5, in New York City right now. And everything left of that green line there down the middle of the state, that's kind of my territory. Pretty territorial because we want to have good rapport with people we work with. But so yeah, I've been basically worked Syracuse, Binghamton, Rochester, Buffalo, in that area. And just to quickly compare how New York City and how upstate New York are different. New York City has the highest level of smuggling in the country by far. It's usually meat products. Like I mentioned, 3 Chinatowns. There's a lot of action going on there. And it's a complex network and large distribution. And shipping containers come in. It's not just small parcels through express courier, it's huge shipping containers. Upstate New York, we're talking small scale, local shops, very few imports. And the only imports that do come in are express courier. They're getting their stuff from New York City. So I emphasize education here because a lot of the store owners are refugee population, and it's more of an education effort for me. And finally, in upstate New York, we do see a lot more propagative seeds. And I think that's because we're closer to agriculture. There are more gardens up here than there are in New York City. And these are just a couple products from New York City, a couple products from upstate New York. As you can see, a lot of meat products down there in New York City, duck blood, pork, and we have some El Salvadorian chicken. Those have kind of been the hot products lately. Upstate New York, I have Nepali beef, I have some Thai mangoes, and some decor items because in upstate New York, we do a lot more surveying of the decor stores than they do in New York City. And finally, I just want to give some praise to City, New York, especially New York City. Our work with Customs is crucial, and a lot of what we do is relayed to Customs. So if we find a store that is non-compliant time and time again, we find basements full of pork meat, et cetera, we give that information to Customs. We find out how they're importing it, and we find out if they have containers on the water. We find out if they've been, shipping air cargo or express courier, and we give all that information to Customs and Border Protection. And so then we target that shipment. We send a request via our database. It goes directly to Customs, and we say this shipper needs to be inspected because we were finding stuff at their location. And so when something like that happens, you get headlines like this. They find 10,000 kilos of prohibited product. And this came because of a USDA SITC referral. And this happens all the time. We don't get mentioned in the article, but that's okay because it's a team effort. But yeah, that's why our effort is crucial. We don't get a lot of publicity for it, but that's okay because that's not why we do it. But if we didn't give those referrals, then CBP would have to rely on just kind of spontaneous suspicion. So to recap, it's a collaborative effort. We work with CBP and other agencies. Only 2% of imported goods actually receive inspection at the port of entry. So our information that we provide them is crucial. That 2% is the most risky 2%. SITC is the last line of defense. Like I said, we work at the port a little bit, but we're an extenuating, security blanket that goes into the marketplace. But we're the last line. If it gets past us, then who knows where it's going. And interagency referrals are key, and they're built into our system. Everything we do, Customs has access to. And our daily objective is compliance. We talk to the public, and our goal is to get them to import properly. We promote commerce. Promote commerce is the #1 goal in USDA, but we want to do it compliant. And our overarching goal is to protect American agriculture and its markets. We don't want disease, we don't want pests, and we want to support local commerce. But we don't regulate for human health. We leave that up to FDA and USDA FSIS. We worry about the cows more than the kids. I know that sounds, it sounds brutal, but it's what we're told to do, so that's what we do. And lastly, it's sometimes just difficult to quantify our success because we do things kind of subtly. But we like to see our success in those port seizures done by CDP because a lot of times that comes from information that we pass on to them. Thank you. That's it. This is my information. And if you know about any smuggling, which I don't presume anyone here to know about any smuggling, but there is a tip line and an email. We do get tips on smuggling in some of the bigger cities, but thank you for your time. And if you have any quick questions, I guess I'm here for that. I'll stop sharing here.
Are there any questions for Ryan? I do have one though, Ryan. This is Christina. On one of the spreadsheets that you showed, on the bottom, it had eggnog with alcohol as exempt. Is there a reason that eggnog would be exempt? Is it the alcohol content itself?
Yeah, so just so you know, all those manuals are written by I guess the experts in that field. So like you look at the animal products manual and you're talking about dairy, those are all regulations come to by veterinary services and veterinary vets basically. But yeah, so the alcohol will likely, at least according to the experts, render any disease risk mitigated. And that's the same for a lot of products that are processed, by heat. So if, let's say, a milk product is canned and exposed to enough heat, then that's considered treated in some regard. The reason that sugar is so essential to these fresh milk products is because sugar is kind of seen as a preservative for foot and mouth disease. And that's why that's written that way. But yeah, again, that goes a little bit beyond me. But yeah, I presume that the eggnog, the alcohol content would render any disease risk kind of mitigated.
And then I guess I have another question. So you can go out and find these things throughout our state. Does that ever get reported somehow to the local, like that state? So in our case, like ag and markets, do they get some sort of report that says, hey, guys, we found X, Y, and Z at your state so that they know it's out there and they can start looking also?
So some of that information is shared at PRAC meetings. Those are the port risk, committees. So I think like the Port of New York kind of has their own, and then Upstate New York has their own. And yeah, we do have like New York Ag and Markets on those calls with us. A lot of that information, I think CITSE kind of keeps closer to the vest and kind of shares with CDP, but they don't want to release that out to the public per se, because there is a certain amount of confidentiality that we have to maintain. But by all means, yes, we are open to sharing that with the state, and we have in the past, but I don't think everything gets shared just, as a standard operating procedure.
Thank you. Does anybody else have questions? If so, go right ahead. All right, if not, just want to thank Ryan for joining us today. And Tori will be putting up a QR code for his survey.